Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, March 19th. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. Although we have a lot going on here in the United States as we transition over to a winter weather pattern again, just for this week, and a clipper system is going to be bringing snow, accumulating snow, to places here in the Midwest, which includes the Chicago area. But there is more intense stuff going on in the South Sudan area. One of the greatest indicators of that is the fact that the schools have closed. At least that's what many news articles say. There's been mandatory school closures in the country due to the heat, and that's very interesting. Normal highs in the month of March. March is the hottest month of the year over there. It's difficult to obtain weather information, accurate weather information for that country, but normal highs range from some upper 90s, possibly low hundreds, but the afternoon highs for the next 2 weeks are expected to be between 106 to 113 degrees, and at times there could be humidity added on to that. During the drier days, the winds tend to be from the north, dew points drop into the 40s. The sun becomes very efficient at heating that type of air when dew points are only in the 40s. Those are the days where temperatures start to go up to the upper 100s into the low and even mid 100 and teens. When you get closer to like March 25th or so, we have the southwest winds that start to bring in humidity. This humidity it originates from the Atlantic Ocean, but that's not really the full picture. This humidity, the city is located very far away from the Atlantic Ocean, but it goes through the tropical rainforests of Africa, which really stop very close to South Sudan. On some maps, it shows it stopping really at the border of South Sudan. When those winds come in, they bring all of the humidity. The dew points do not lose their punch. The air mass does not lose its punch of humidity. It maintains it, kind of like what goes on here in the Midwest when we have a south flow from the Gulf of Mexico. The dew points are just as high over here as they are on the Gulf Coast during those times. In fact, here in the Midwest, by the cornfields, the dew points tend to go up. And it's similar over there with the tropical rainforests. You'll see the dew points when they first but the coastal cities are in the mid-70s, low to mid-70s. The dew points remain that way, and they even go up a couple degrees as they travel through the tropical rainforests of Africa. When you reach South Sudan, the dew points drop, but if the wind is indeed coming from that direction, we do have humidity over there. Dew points do go up into the mid and upper 60s, perhaps even warmer. So you would have a heat index in that type of scenario. The only thing is that this is a forecast, that humidity is a forecast from the European computer model from March 25th. One thing to point out is that these computer models depend upon the jet stream for their accuracy, and there's been a number of complaints really about how in the tropical areas there really isn't any model that's forecasting the situation well. Perhaps weather experts have more knowledge about that. Maybe there is some other model that's forecasting the situation well, but that's important to point out. And the country India, they point this out a lot, that they really do not know what's going to happen, that the forecasts are really not accurate. In a country like South Sudan, there's other issues. Many of the people are not even aware that there's a weather bureau. That's what many of the reports say. And in fact, there might not be a real weather bureau. And this explains something else that's going on AccuWeather. AccuWeather will show that the normal high for many of these cities is in the low 80s. But what I think is going on is that there really is no weather station, no official weather station in the country, and at least nothing that AccuWeather has access to. This is just my assumption. And then probably taking the closest city that has official professional weather equipment and telling you what the average temperature is based upon that city. And then based on that city, as we spoke about in the previous episode, one would think that the temperatures are 30 and 40 degrees above normal right now in South Sudan. In reality, it is above normal, but it's not 30 to 40 degrees. You look up in other sources of information will tell you that March is the hottest month over there, and temperatures do hit 100 degrees there. In fact, that's the normal high for many of those cities. But they don't get much hotter than that. They don't get much hotter than 104, and certainly not 107 or 109. So it's interesting. It's actually pretty impressive that the government actually is taking action to close the school. you have to realize also it's implied from many of the reports that there really is no air conditioning in many of the schools, perhaps even all the schools. Not only that, it's being recommended that the schools get electricity so that they could at least plug in air conditioner units. So many of the schools apparently don't even have electricity. So the society is just so different over there. So it's just interesting how they actually react to just a 5 or 10 degree change, similar to what would happen here in the United States in a city like Phoenix, where temperatures hit 105 all the time. Yet the day it hits 110, excessive heat warnings go into effect. It's only 5 degrees warmer than what the average temperature is. Now, there's something which is more important to speak about over there, and that's really the deforestation that's taking place just to the south of the country by a mountain range to the south of the country. Many say that it's most significant in the country of South Sudan, but, reports are always different. So when people cut down trees, when you lose the forests, so there's the carbon sink aspect, which, many people who are focused more on climate, they will focus more on the carbon sink and how these forests, especially trees, absorb many of the greenhouse gases, and it allows really the world to breathe again. So climate activists really love trees, and they hate it when trees are being cut down. From a meteorological perspective, it's a little bit different, but this has a very strong impact even on it from day-to-day weather, and certainly on the season. Agriculture, we know, has a very strong impact, and the biggest proof to that is the Dust Bowl years of the 1930s here in the Midwest, when the crops were failing, although drought initiated it. But the agriculture practices of the farmers also made things worse. And because there was no cornfields and the agriculture didn't exist, there was no humidity. And when there's no humidity, the sun becomes very efficient at heating things up. That moist air coming in off the Gulf of Mexico does not make it all the way up here if it doesn't have agriculture to bring it up here. And a lot of times, in addition to that, the center part of these heat domes could develop further north. They tend to be attracted to where the hottest temperatures are, so that there really isn't much moisture transport even coming from the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a whole domino effect that takes place just by not having a corn crop here in the Midwest. That's one of the reasons, this corn crop is one of the reasons why these greenhouse gases affect the Midwest less than almost any other part of the world, and it does impact us less than any part of this country. It's because of the cornfields, and that just absorbs the greenhouse gases, and that's something that works for our benefit. When you go out into Africa, this is something which is very important for the world, are those tropical rainforests. Now, there are reports that areas just to the west of South Sudan is swampy land, and it's really a type of land that people can't even get access to, and therefore it's in a certain way it's just safer that way, and there's trees and it's an enormous carbon sink, so moisture's coming in off of that, and it seems like that would be pretty safe. But there have been reports about forests which are in the edge of a mountain range, even on the mountains in a certain way, to the south of South Sudan. And that's where there's a lot of trees being cut down. It could be elsewhere in the country as well. So when you have these trees being cut down, the agriculture is taken away, and that robs the air of moisture. The sun becomes more efficient at heating things up. And there's other domino effects that we're not even aware of. One does have to wonder, though, if the increase in temperature is only 5 or 10 degrees and it is offset by a drop in humidity, by lower dew points, how much of an impact does that really make on humankind? Indirectly, and this is when you get back into climate, it has an enormous impact on the world, and that's due to the African jet stream. Really, in Africa, there should not be any jet stream. And because jet streams develop from contrast in temperatures, there really is no contrast in temperatures. But that's what the case would be if it wasn't for the tropical rainforest next to the Sahara Desert. that creates an enormous contrast in weather conditions, an enormous contrast in air pressure, and there's a contrast in temperatures. The air in the Sahara Desert is hotter than the air by the tropical rainforest, although more humid air tends to be lighter and rises. Either way, there is a jet stream that moves from the east to the west, and that's the jet stream that's responsible for the development of tropical cyclones. And so we see there is a connection between the moisture environment and the dry environment, the two different air masses colliding, which creates the jet stream, and then it impacts the rest of the world because of the tropical storms. So the domino effect, this is always there, and that's something that really people who are more into climatology or climate activists can get into to see how significant that impact really is. But again, from a weather perspective, it's more of the lack of agriculture in the immediate place, if trees are being cut down all at once. So that would impact a place right away, just like we saw in the 1930s. Either way, there is some other complications over there, interesting stuff that doesn't apply here in the United States when thinking of a synoptic weather setup. And I don't know if you can necessarily use the knowledge that one has about the weather over here in this country and apply it over there. In fact, it's probably the least applicable over there of all places in the world because it's along the equator. And the equator makes things very complex in trying to understand how high pressure and low pressure works without having access to any weather experts that work in that area or a weather bureau. And even if there is a weather bureau, there's very few, if any, weather experts in the South Sudan area. That's what it says in all these news articles. So multiple news sources seem to be saying the same thing. But when you have in a country that's so close to the equator, it's being impacted by an air mass that covers both the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. And high pressure in the northern hemisphere is clockwise. It works clockwise. The Bermuda high is what brings in the southwest flow of hot, humid air here into the Midwest. It's all the way out in Bermuda, but there's a secondary area of high pressure that develops over here by the Gulf Coast or sometimes over Texas. Either way, it's an enormous air mass, and it covers a large area. Baltimore gets the same south wind that St. Louis, Missouri gets a lot of the times, and that's all from that Bermuda high. But over there, such an air mass, it's difficult to envision really exactly how it all works because that high pressure is it's clockwise in the northern hemisphere and it's counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. So just to understand how the wind circulation works, really from someone who only understands the weather from here in the United States, it really isn't possible to understand. But the traditional words of heat dome, I would imagine, those are classic words that are going to be used to understand the South Sudan heat wave, but perhaps not necessarily. It does seem like there are other bodies of water around there with very high water temperatures, such as the African Great Lakes. Lake Victoria seemed to be the largest from what I saw, along with the Indian Ocean. But it does seem like when the wind comes in off the Indian Ocean, it's getting blocked by some mountain range, and the air is heating up and drying, which is called compressional warming, which is bringing a drop in those dew points, kind of like what happens in Arizona. So it's only really when the winds are from the southwest, coming from the Atlantic Ocean all the way out there, far, far away, all the way in the West African coast, and they travel over the tropical rainforests. That's when the dew points tend to go up. When the wind comes from much closer bodies of water, it doesn't impact the air mass that much, and South Sudan doesn't really impact it at all, perhaps, although dew points might go into the 50s, and that's likely due to the mountain range that's on the eastern parts of South Sudan. And the southern parts, although one has to wonder if there was ever a lot of trees over there, if the winds coming from Lake Victoria would, in theory, have brought the dew points up and bring a reduction in those temperatures. One additional thing to point out, however, is that even if you say that the impact that this heat has on the human body is about the same, having very hot and dry versus temperatures a little bit lower but very humid, but one thing that humid air does do is sometimes you could have these pop-up thunderstorms, and that does greatly help people out. It makes it safe it's a safer place after that. And this is something that the United Arab Emirates takes advantage of. They have this remarkable system where they send up these electric drones into the sky to electrify and to see the clouds without any chemicals. They do it through electricity, and they don't do it to bring rain in order to end any drought or anything. They do it to bring rain so that the heat goes away, so that temperatures go down. It's hot either way, but temperatures go down. So when all is said and done, when you're reducing the heat in that way through rain, the impact, the danger on the human body is less. Thank you for listening. I wish everybody a wonderful day. Information in this episode likely will need to be updated at a later point.